Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Talking About the Big Stuff podcast with Michael Cole and Matthew Cravat. I am Michael Cole.
And I am Matthew Cravat.
Tonight's topic is whataboutism. And I think it's an interesting topic. It is largely political, but doesn't have to be political. I am trying not to just keep us drilling down on the election for our sanity and for the sanity of our audience, of you all. But I did think whataboutism was an interesting topic to bring up for tonight. All right.
Isn't that the topic?
Yeah, that's a Bill Murray movie, isn't it? What about Jism? No. What about Bob? All right. So, for audience members who may not be aware of what whataboutism is, I'm not sure if it's a logical fallacy or not, but it is
It is a Russian propaganda technique.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But... Yeah, so it started, or it was perfected by, maybe they didn't start it, but whataboutism is, and it's similar to a logical fallacy, that it's something that comes up in arguments and debates, but it's trying to change the subject away from the main topic of the debate with something that seems related, but really is just an attempt to change the subject to something where you can win on, related to like similar to straw manning and stuff. Again, not the same. So it's more like you're arguing about, which Scorsese movie is the best, and somebody like, well, what about Back to the Future? You have to take into account in time travel films, and it's a completely different topic, and you just shifted the topic to a different topic because you were going to lose in the original one. And maybe you can win on this one, and then make it seem like you won the original debate because you switched topics.
Yeah. Largely, the way I'm familiar with whataboutism is political in the fact that, like,
I was trying to use a non-political example.
Well, we can come up with something that's not going to be like, oh God, they're talking about the election again. But like, let's say, let's local politics. Like, oh, we my development. We have a red light at the end of the main street out on right, and
you guys can find where he lives now. Across street.
And in the last year, they made it a no turn on red, and like I'm sure that took some work to get done.
That's fine because I make a left turn.
Right.
No, actually, I don't go out that exit when I go to your house.
Yeah, because it's the opposite side of my neighborhood from you. But if during that argument of getting that set up, that it would have been very easy to say, well, what about the
What about the other exit to the neighborhood? We should be up there.
And essentially, like, what you're doing in that way is saying, like, here is why are we trying to figure out this problem when there will still be problems, and that is what gets I think the most frustrating, commonly is that type of whataboutism. So that fallacy
is the fallacy of relative privation. I think I might be getting that word wrong, but I think that's what it is. And that's there's other things more important. So why are we focusing on this? And what it end up being is that you can never find, there's never anything you should spend time, energy, or money on because there's always something else. So they're definitely related.
So
the fallacy of relative privation part is kind of like when you say, let's do something, Black Lives Matter, let's do stop, and they go, yeah, Black Lives Matter is great. But what about the fact that veterans don't have health care?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, so it is a what about, because you're switching the topic, but it's also, you're doing it based on priority to say, like, well, you shouldn't spend money on this issue when you can spend time and money on this issue. And they're not related, and you can have two different budget items for them.
Yeah. So the thing that kind of put this in my head this week was I've been seeing my father-in-law on the weekends. And so we're having these conversations, and then we have a week to ruminate, and then we talk throughout the week, but it's largely through FaceTime. So the meaningful conversations have been kind of more in person. So I think I had mentioned a couple weeks ago that he and I talked about he was talking about how wokeism and the trans stuff was a big part of what people are blaming the election problems on. And my point when I came up was I didn't hear anybody talking about it. Like, I really didn't hear anybody on the left talking about it. How did we lose on an issue we didn't talk about? Like, how did we talk about an issue too much that we never talked about, essentially?
Right. There were no trans people on stage at the Democratic National Convention.
No, and it springboarded from there into, well, how many trans people are there? And I said, I don't even care. Like, I don't care how many trans people there are. That part doesn't matter to me. And then, let
me just specify for anybody, it's your first episode. What Mike means, the numbers are not important. One is as important as a million.
I was getting there.
I just want to make sure.
I was getting there in the second half.
Don't jump to a conclusion.
I was getting there in the second half. So fast forward a week. We have a week, and then we're walking around a store, and it comes up again, and he goes, by the way, I looked it up, and I forget what the number he said was, but let's say it's 1% of the population,
1.5%, something like that. Yeah.
He said, I just think that there are much bigger problems for us to handle, which is not really, he wasn't really doing whataboutism, but it made me think of this. But I said, I said, we're not choosing between helping trans people and fighting racism against black people, or what, like, because that was the example, was racism that he brought up as I was like, we can do both things, and like, they're not counter. I said, if you were asking me to choose between the 1% of people that are trans and something that is like opposite, or like, something
should we be pro-trans or anti-trans? Those are things you can't hold both views, because there's two opposite views. Or being pro-trans and pro-black lives matter can live in coexistence. Yeah. One does not take the place of the other.
Right. And exactly. And I really feel like a lot of times we look at especially finances and efforts and things like that as, I have enough money to buy pizza for lunch today or to buy Chinese food. I don't have enough money to buy pizza and Chinese food. So like, that means that I can only get one or the other. But when it comes to not having a racist society and not having a transphobic society, we can work on having both. Well, I'm not sure we can have both, but we're not. I really hope so.
I think the key is, we're not talking about lunch tomorrow. We're talking about our lunch budget for the next year. And for our lunch budget for the next year, you can have both over the course of the year. So I get it if you're saying, hey, we're having a summit meeting tomorrow on one topic, then you have to pick a topic for that summit meeting. But that's not the administration's goals for the year. But then to your point, there's the Democratic Party did not run on woke issues in any way, shape, or form. No. They defended themselves when woke issues were thrown, like, I'm going to, like, Trump was like, I'm going to attack trans people. They might say, that's not good. Don't do that. That's not running on the issue. That's responding. And that's been the case on all the woke things. Intentionally, it was something that Republicans intentionally have made the issues in the Republican voters' mind, even though it's not the platform of any party.
Yeah, and I kind of use that as an example of, I said, like, ultimately, this was all the other side talking about this, and the reason they're talking about this is because if you're an undecided, like, middle of the road, don't know anything about anything kind of person, the argument of they're letting men in women's bathrooms might sound intense to you because you're a low information voter, whereas it's harder to run on, they're letting black people in with white. Like, it is harder, even though it's happening in some places.
Right.
Trump can't say that.
It's hard to be publicly anti-black to the general public. It's easy to be anti-gay and anti-trans.
It's much easier to be anti-trans at the moment, like, on a larger scale. I'm not saying that there isn't racism. There absolutely is, but like, we don't see the typical, like, Trump or any, like, Trump surrogates being, getting into the real anti-black racism.
Not anti-black. It's anti-Mexican and anti-Muslim. Yeah. And
so I said, like, we don't get to control the narrative of the others, of the side that's doing all the horse shit. Like, we have to kind of deal with it. And so I said, so they brought it up, but what we can't do is just, like, throw the trans people under the bus and be like, well, that's the only thing you're going to attack us on. Well, then fuck trans. Like, we can't do that. And so that was it. He really wasn't doing whataboutism. And like I said, we're having a good, nuanced conversation, although it was in the middle of a Barnes and Noble, and I can only imagine. And we were in the religion section. We were just wandering. We weren't reading through the religion.
To be fair, you're always in the religion section. You love the religion section. You got to stop masturbating in the religious section.
They have like 3 books by atheists in that section. So, like big prominent atheists. So. But no, it happens to be kind of the center of the store, and it's on the way to the children's section, which is where Sarah and Logan were, and we started talking about it. He was not doing whataboutism, and genuinely it was kind of.
That was the success of the Republican marketing scheme of the campaign, to make the conversation about topics that are not the important topics to have in the election.
Whataboutism succeeded in a large way. They've been doing really well with it, and maybe that's something we need to learn how to combat is whataboutism.
Or maybe we need to learn that American people are stupid and don't care about issues, and we need a populist like a Bernie Sanders. It's too late for Bernie now, but we need someone like him who people like because they want to vote for him because they like him. The number one thing people said about George Bush was over Al Gore is, I could see having a beer with him. That people want to vote for someone they like, not someone who's going to be a good president. And sometimes Bill Clinton, Obama, you get both. They're likable and they're charismatic, and they are a good president. But that's all the American voter cares about: popularity contests, king of the prom. Who do you money? Who do you love?
We'll obviously never know. Back to my
okay, I'm going to say real fast, Mikey. You got that quote, and I'm very happy you got that quote, even if Mike didn't get it.
I don't get it. You want to explain it?
1989 Batman movie. Joker goes, money. Who do you love? I'm here giving out free money. Where's the Batman? He's at home washing his tights. But I know Mikey will get the reference because we're old and we saw 1989 Batman in the movies as adults.
I was 5. So I do want to say, so I know that I talk way too much about Harry Potter on this, just in general,
because you're a transphobe.
Yeah. I wasn't even connecting those dots, but no, but I genuinely loved Harry Potter. I will not be giving them any more money of my money. I can't
speak
swear
for
that
Logan.
for everyone in the family. But I have not. I will not give them any more money. But I remember, actually, I have 2 things real quick. One is I remember at some point in the last 10 years, because when I read the books and saw the movies, I thought, when you see Cornelius Fudge not believing that Voldemort is back until he sees him with his own eyes fighting Dumbledore, and when you see Umbridge, and you're like, well, Umbridge probably doesn't think that this is really true either. She thinks that, and how could they not believe it's coming?
And then she doesn't care because
and then she doesn't care. But you get both reactions. You get Fudge, who is like, oh shit, this is actually happening.
What have I let happen by my
What have
inaction?
I let happen?
Yeah.
And then you get her, who's like, I don't know if she was always on that side or she just is an opportunist or what. But
the trains are going to run on time, and that's what I care about.
I used to think this is unrealistic. How could this possibly happen? And now I'm like, oh no, we literally
voted for Voldemort.
Yeah. And then the second thing I wanted to say was that there is a we rewatched Deathly Hallows Part 2 recently, and in Deathly Hallows Part 2, when you're familiar with the mall,
I am.
When Harry kinda dies and goes to the kinda heaven and sees
King's
Dumbledore. King's Cross Station, but heaven form. It is all white and empty, and it was supposed to be
it was in his mind.
It was a way station between here.
Is all this happening in my mind? Yes, but why would that mean it isn't real? It's all in his mind. It's not heaven. It's in his mind.
That is the exact line I was about to say. How can she write that line and then be a transphobe? Of course it's happening in your mind, but that doesn't mean it's not real.
Well, I think even worse, when they all turn into Harry and Hermione is Harry, she's still Hermione. She's still a woman, even though she's in a man's body. She wrote the character.
I agree. I did say to Logan recently, I said, do you think that when the girls turn into Harry, that they grow penises temporarily? And he's like, I don't know, but we need to find out.
I mean, they clearly do. She's got to have gone touched herself to check it out. But But it's similar. She makes a point of how weird it is to be Harry, but because she's still a woman, it's like she didn't become masculine in a personality by
And they
our
get his
gender roles.
eyesight, and they
Yeah, I mean, but she's still her. She's still a woman. Like, how did she write that? She wrote a scene where a woman is in a man's body and is still a woman despite the biology, and she doesn't get that you can be in a man's body and be a woman.
Yeah. What about no? So you had mentioned when I brought up whataboutism that sometimes we overuse the argument, or
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, and it goes for fallacies as well, love to attack a person's argument by attacking what they think is a fallacy or whataboutism. So an example is in a political conversation that's not recent, when the Trinity Lutheran case for the Supreme Court. You all know the Trinity Lutheran case, right, everybody? Everybody? Trinity Lutheran? No?
I actually have heard it before, heard the term,
Yeah.
I've heard the name, but I don't know.
So Trinity Lutheran was, I forgot the state, but it was a state had a policy of being able to fund daycares to, like there was money up for grabs and people could apply for grants, daycares, to do construction of the daycare. And Trinity Lutheran Church had a daycare connected to the church, and they wanted money to put down rubber padding in the playground. And they were turned down because it was a religious school, and part of, it was rooms in the church. It was not it wasn't a religious school. It was just the church had a daycare at church. And they sued and said, not fair. Just because we're a church means you can't give money. And but our Constitution says we can't give money to it. And they were like, yeah, but we'll just move. We won't use that for preaching. We'll only use it for floor. And a lot of the liberals in the group that I was in on Facebook, or this political group that talking about this case, were like, that's just bullshit. Because that means, okay, fine, they got the money from the government, but that freed up all this other budget that they can use then to preach. So that's just bullshit. And I said, yeah, but that's the same thing we say with Planned Parenthood. The Planned Parenthood says our budget says we don't use government money for abortions. We use it for everything else. But that frees up money for abortions. And I was attacked as that's whataboutism, talking about abortion all of a sudden. I'm like, no, I'm talking not about abortion. I'm talking about the parallel thing of shifting the money in your budget. It's the same exact thing, but on the case where it's a liberal thing you like, you're for it, and where it's a conservative thing you don't like, and everyone just, it's whataboutism, because they refuse to even talk about the issue is the same issue. Are you okay with shifting money in the budget so that you can get funding to do something that you're not allowed to use funding for? And again, they would just like refuse to engage in the argument because they would just identify it as whataboutism, even though it wasn't. I wasn't changing the subject. I was talking about the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Why are you okay with moving the budget here and not here? You're just not being consistent. Just admit you don't like the church.
Yeah. I think comparing, I agree with you 100%. I think that comparing an argument and use it like the mechanics of the argument, essentially, that is a completely different thing, because if any whataboutist issue that I think of, you like, we can't handle trans stuff because there's racism. That the mechanics of the argument again, about fixing transphobia, that argument would still work for racism. Whereas your argument, you're saying in opposite directions, the exact same argument structure.
Like I say, there's an organization getting government money that they can't use for A, so they're using it for B and then taking the previous money for B and using it for A. Is that okay? And in one case, you're for it. In another case, you're against it. You're not being intellectually consistent.
Right. And that's not what, I agree. That is not whataboutism at all. Yeah. I
don't really like when things, and that's true for a lot of fallacies. People like to say, aha, I spotted a fallacy, or whether right or wrong, and think that means they win the argument rather than engaging with the argument.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think we get that with a lot of stuff with arguments, like there's the appeal to authority, and it's like, oh no, but like if
I'm not saying it's true because Neil deGrasse Tyson said it. I'm just saying Neil deGrasse Tyson wrote a well-researched book about this and is saying it in better words than I can. Yeah. Exactly. I'm not saying it's true because he's right in everything that he says.
Yeah.
But he is the authority and here speaking for the consensus.
Yeah. I like to share George Carlin quotes a lot, or I used to. I don't do it on Instagram as much, but I used to do it on Facebook. George Carlin quotes that I thought applied to stuff. and I think George Carlin had a way of putting things that other people aren't as good at. And I put, something that, he's got that argument about you have no rights, euphemistic language. There's all these different, like,
if it can be
arguments.
taken away, it's not a right.
Right. But he doesn't have a PhD in any of those things. And people used to be like, well, who? And I'm like, point out the flaw in what he's saying. And then we can say, like, well, yeah, but like,
I'm not saying it's true because he said it. I just like the words he used to say the opinion that I also hold.
Right. And especially when it's something that's, there is the only thing you have is that George Carlin isn't the guy that you want to hear that from. Not that anything he said, like, you can't, there was several times where this came up.
An appeal to authority is saying, listen, this is true because George Carlin said it. That's an appeal to authority. Saying George Carlin put it well is not an appeal to authority, but people want to call it that because, and it's funny because there's a fallacy, it's called the fallacy. That just because you identify a fallacy does not mean your argument is better than the person you're arguing with. It doesn't mean you're right. It just means they committed a fallacy. Yeah. Or in this case, didn't, and you're accusing them of it.
Yeah.
But I think I see that with whataboutism as well as other things often. People like to say, how can I win an argument? Oh, if I accuse you of a fallacy or a this or a that means I win because I accused you of something in the argument rather than actually winning the merits of the argument.
Side note, this is not a whataboutism thing, but it's a fallacy thing. I think maybe this isn't a fallacy, but it should be. Or maybe it's not a known specific named fallacy.
It might not be a formal fallacy, I think would be the term you're looking for.
But the thing that edgelords do, which is as soon as I get you upset, I win. I just have to keep a calm voice, but I can say whatever the fuck I want. But as soon as I get you upset, because I fall for that, I get too upset. I get too impassioned because of empathy, like we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, depending on when you're listening to this. But like I get too, I don't have a calm voice, and I don't stay calm in moments of, and so is used against me often as you are, like calm down, like there's no, and I'm like, you're not being more reasonable than me. Your voice just sounds nicer right now than mine does. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like your heart rate is lower than mine, but that's not like, that doesn't mean you're making better points than me. I get that all the time, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, and I think it goes along with if I can catch you in a fallacy, or if I can make you lose your temper, like if I can argue better, like you may be a better debater than I am, and you can debate that the Earth is flat better than I can debate that it's ovoid or spheroid because I'm not a scientist and I don't have all the facts, and your rhetoric is better. It doesn't mean you're right. Just because you can argue better doesn't mean you're right. That's why there are some things where it's not worth having a debate on because it doesn't. We're not going to. It's not an opinion thing that we can move our opinion on the topic.
Yeah.
There's a right answer, and our debate does not affect the reality of the answer.
Right. What do you watch Wisecrack at all on YouTube? I think it's called Wisecrack.
I am not familiar with such a thing.
You would know some of their video series that they have. I am forgetting what the names of them are. Like they do philosophical stuff on. I'm trying to look them up real quick.
I see Rick and Morty. I see the Good Place. Is that what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
the Wisecrack edition.
Yeah, Wisecrack. They do all kinds of philosophical analysis of different things. And I watched one today, which was the problem with Jubilee. And do you know what Jubilee is?
She's a mutant who can disrupt electrical.
Jubilee, yes, that is true. Jubilee is a YouTube channel, and so Wisecrack did a breakdown of another YouTube channel. I'm sorry that this is getting so in
You're getting very meta.
But Jubilee is a YouTube channel where they'll do. They have a show called Middle Ground, and they're the ones that you probably saw recently with Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk, and it's Ben Shapiro versus 20 college students. And Charlie Kirk versus 20 college students, and they do these political videos, middle ground, where it's like we got 9, hardcore Trumpers and 9 hardcore Harris people, and we ask, and there is this weird dynamic that they set up every time, which is like a combative debate that they want to pretend is like they want both sides. They want both things on. They want to pretend it's just a conversation. They also want to promote the debate side of it. And Wisecrack did a thing today, or recently, I saw it today, about Jubilee and things like that are building us into a society that thinks that there is a reasonable debate to be had on every issue. He goes, and he said, literally, there's a video on here that is scientists versus flat earthers. This is not, the debates need to happen on things where...
Say, you don't have to get to an opinion on which of those is true. One of them is true. You don't have an opinion whether there is such thing as chocolate and vanilla ice cream. Your opinion is which you prefer, not do they exist.
Anyway, but the point being, we're getting a little off topic. I guess we're getting more into logical fallacy, which largely this is a logical fallacy. But I think whataboutism is
I think logical fallacies in its purest form, they're really identified to self-check yourself. Make sure you don't fall into this fallacy. Where whataboutism is a distinct, dishonest debate technique that you intentionally do, where a lot of times fallacies can be that, but that's not what they originally were meant to describe. They meant to describe mistakes that you make in debate, in rhetoric, where whataboutism was specifically this is a way to switch the topic so that you can win the debate.
I think whataboutism, so I agree with you in part. I think whataboutism was probably started as a deliberate thing, but I think there's plenty of people who do it.
I'm sure it happens by accident as well. You're right.
Yeah, but that's because we've become so, and a lot of this is people don't think for themselves anymore, in a large part. Like you were talking about the people that were...
Do I think for myself? She said, no, I don't think for myself.
Yeah. So you were talking about when you were talking about the people accusing you of whataboutism when it clearly wasn't whataboutism. Those people aren't able to think through the process. Like that was the problem. They're not giving themselves.
Well, I mean, I always come back to it, but I think a lot of it was cognitive dissonance. They did not want to admit they could be wrong about this topic. Sure. And they had emotional tie to the argument they were having about Trinity Lutheran. And so they weren't listening to the details of what I was saying. They just jumped on, aha, here's the way I don't have to change my mind.
And I think that a large part of what we do in these like inability to think is like there's plenty of, and you and I think do this, especially when we're talking to each other, but like there's plenty of things where I'm on a side. That doesn't mean I agree with all the arguments on the side.
I get very mad when there's arguments I don't agree with. Like I can't read social media. I'm like, you're wrong. You're just wrong. I mean, I don't want to say you're wrong because I agree with what you're trying to get to, but the way you're saying it is wrong.
Yeah, like I like to use the metaphor of, or the example, like not a metaphor, example of, I think we all, hopefully agree that on a nice day the sky is blue. Like I know the sky's not always blue. It's not blue right now.
Nice is subjective.
But occasionally the sky is blue. I love
a rainy night. Yeah.
Now, if you said that the sky is blue because there's a dome full of Smurfs on each other's shoulders, your argument is not helpful
because they're so small.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them. And so like I remember actually posting that years and years ago, and a family member said, well, I think that just like gives people have different perspectives, and that's cool to have. And I'm like, sure, but like
but there are not. There's not a dome of Smurfs though. It's not right.
Yeah. And so like I really do want us to I want arguments to be reasonable, and sometimes you're wrong and reasonable, and sometimes you're right and unreasonable, and sometimes it's just like I don't know how many miles there are to the sun. If I threw out a number,
about 93 million, give or take, because it's not the same all the time. It varies on average.
But if you told me that, and then Alex tells me 89 million, one of you is closer than the other, but neither of you is being stupid.
Right.
Whereas the Smurfs dome thing is stupid.
Right.
It's a stupid.
Well, if you're German,
what?
Smurfs are a German toy. Before they got to America, it was originally German toys. Then the cartoon was American. So I had this conversation. I had this conversation with Aaron Rabinowitz from the Creator Accountability Network, but on his podcast when I was on Embrace the Void. this came up as one of the topics we talked about, and the example that I use that frustrates me, that I don't want to argue in a group because I want the person who's saying it to win their argument, but I don't like this example, is when they talk about rights are not like pie. Someone else getting a piece doesn't mean your piece is smaller. And I'm like, that's wrong, though. If I'm a white guy who is benefiting from racism and you take away that benefit by saying that all the other colors of the rainbow now have an equal opportunity for the job, I just went from an 80% chance of getting that job to a 12% chance because you got other people to have a chance at the job that racism would have kept them from getting. That is a smaller slice of the pie. Like, definitively, it is. So it's a bad argument to say that equal rights is not like, it's not like pie. You don't get a smaller piece, because you do if you were benefiting from the getting more chances at the pie. So, but I don't want to.
Just like I can make more money if I go rob people, but that doesn't make it right to do it. But I could make more money that way.
Like, I'm not a fan of people. Like we should have our rights reduced to make more room for rights for others. But saying that we don't is wrong. And I'm not going to get in the middle of an argument and side with the MAGA heads against the liberal because the liberal is using a stupid example. But I do want to pull them aside later and say, don't use that example because that's stupid.
Yeah,
that's not a good example.
Yeah, we need largely to figure out how to make our arguments better, because we have a lot of bad arguments on a lot of things that we're right about in general as a side, not you and I. We're always right. But then we also need to figure out how to...
always left.
Yeah. We need to figure out how to make our arguments better, and we need to figure out how to make them more concise, and that's so difficult. Like, because I think a large part of the reason why we keep losing is not that the arguments aren't right. It's that, like, if I tell you, well, actually, like they're just way more soundbite snippable on the Republican side.
But we do bad sound bites, though. They sound bite better than we do. Because saying defund the police is a terrible sound bite, because what you mean is restructure public safety. You don't mean defund, you mean restructure. Because you mean that money needs to go to something else that does the job that the police were doing, so they don't lose money because they also lost the function they were paid to do. So defund is not the end goal. Just having less money is not the goal. It's restructuring that's the goal. So it's a terrible bumper sticker.
Yeah.
To get your point across.
For what I'm talking about, I agree with you. But for what I'm talking about, the example I always think of is voter ID. When I was 20 years old and I was still voting conservative, I went to vote in my first presidential election that I got to vote in, and they didn't require an ID because I was in Massachusetts. And I remember going home and being like, that's crazy that they don't require an ID. And my dad and my mom being like, yeah, it's insane that they don't require ID. It's kind of without hearing the other side, it's such a simple fact. So, like, or a simple concept, and Republicans have been able to drill those home. But then once you find out, like, oh, the reason why that voter ID is a bad idea is because it is purposely done to disenfranchise and manipulate, then you're like, oh, okay, but that's like a longer sentence. Other than you need ID to do this, you need ID to do that. Like, it's so simple. That simplicity, even when it's wrong,
like the flip
is
side,
easier to swallow.
Because the argument needs to be as concise. It needs to be: are you saying someone who doesn't own a piece of ID loses their right to vote? Like, because that's the other side that you don't generally hear. You hear, you're disenfranchising, and people, and you have to go, well, how is it disenfranchised? Well, people have to take a day off from work to get their ID. Well, it's not hard. No, you can get turned away from the DMV 5 times because you don't have the right stuff with you. And how many days of work do you lose? And if it's not one in your town, you have to travel. And if you're 67, how are you going to travel there? You don't drive anymore. All these different things versus should I lose the right to vote because I don't own a government ID? Do I lose the right to vote because of that? Yeah. That's the concise argument that we don't make often enough.
We do. We need to figure it out, because wrong and simple is often beating right, but a little more complicated. And sometimes it's considerably more complicated to understand. But sometimes,
like people like to say the right doesn't meme well, and the thing is, the right memes extremely well. Mm-hmm. Just not in comedy memes, because their shit's not funny. Being a racist, xenophobic prick is not funny, so Republican comedy is not funny. But they're really good at short, sweet memes like, I'm pro-life. I mean, I want to kill people by not giving them life and health insurance, and I want to kill people by kicking them out of the country to make them go back to a country where there's cartels trying to kill them, and I want to execute people for any crime because I love the idea of execution. But I'm pro-life because I'm for women dying from pregnancy complications.
Yeah.
They're really good at that meme of pro-life, even though it doesn't match up with their beliefs at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think that on that specific issue, we are not amazing with our talking points either. Like that one is one of those ones where like the arguments that I hear about the pro-choice arguments, I'm sometimes like, ugh. And it's not usually like big famous people, but you get like the one that drives me crazy is when they argue that a fetus isn't a life, and I'm like, no, a fetus isn't a human. But like the idea that it's not a life is weird to me. Like that comes up a lot, and it's usually people that are not great at talking through the topics. Like they're not making great points on other things. They happen to be passionate about being pro-choice, but they're not like particularly well equipped for arguing. But we hear it a lot.
Yeah. If just because it's not viable and it can't survive on its own doesn't mean it's not alive. It just needs someone else to process food and blood for them.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it's a life. So is an amoeba. So is bacteria. Yeah. So is in certain types of cancer. Like those are all lives. They're just not lives we give a shit about. As opposed to, is it a human? Is a different question.
Yeah. Well, then you have the philosophical thing. Answer. But then the philosophical thing is, I don't even care if it's a human. No woman should be forced to carry another human to term if they don't want to. It's dangerous. It's like it's two different arguments, and that's something that's difficult too because because people are prepared to argue one or the other. But it's like, yeah, I don't care. If I wake up and you have stitched somebody to me to be using my kidney and heart for them to stay alive, I am not obligated to stay in that hospital bed and keep them alive.
I completely agree. I just think that it's not a life is an argument we need to get rid of. We need to just make our arguments as bulletproof as possible. And I've gotten into because I have a lot of pro-life people in my life, and when we talk about it, like it comes up, and I'm like, I'm not going to give you that because I don't think it isn't a life. I think it's not a human.
They're pro-pregnancy. They're not pro-life.
Yeah,
because if they were, don't let them define the term when it's not true. Because if it's pro-life, they would give the mother free health care so the baby would be born alive. And they don't want to give the mother free health care because they don't care if there's a miscarriage. They just don't want you to choose. They're anti-choice. They're not pro.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you almost completely on that. I do try to call people what they want to be called, and that's where I like.
Yeah, but sometimes they're manipulating you by making you call them a thing that they have the positive name. Like, how can they be wrong? They're pro-life. How can that be wrong? It's like, well, because they're not pro-life. They're just saying they are. Like Nazis saying that they're a socialist party didn't make them a socialist party. The first thing they did was come from the socialists. Like, just because they call themselves something doesn't mean they are the thing they call themselves.
Totally fair.
Means that's why I don't even think it's a great idea to say, well, people can identify as whatever they want. Because then if they want to, I mean, I know people say that for trans people, and the idea is good, but then when an asshole says, I want to identify as Apache helicopter, you can't say no to that if you just said you can identify as whatever you want. That's a bad argument. You can identify as whatever you want. A more proper argument is only you know what gender you are. Someone else can't tell you your gender is different than you can identify as whatever you want. Like human life versus life. It's different specific terms.
I don't know that I agree on that particular thing. So I'll use the Apache helicopter as a good one. So as a good example, like I don't give a shit if you identify as a Apache helicopter. Go ahead. It doesn't affect anybody but you. You still have to but regardless of gender, when people start talking about, you can identify as a cat, I don't give a fuck if you want to identify as a cat.
Well, laws don't apply to me because laws don't apply to cats, and identify as a cat.
I was going to say, as long as you can identify as a cat and still legally be required to pay your taxes. You can.
So then you can identify as a woman, but still have to use the men's room. Like you don't get to do. I mean, that thing is, if you're saying when you identify as a thing, you get to be treated as if you are that thing, and then you're saying, but not if I identify as a cat. If I identify as a woman, I get to do women's things, but if I identify as a cat, I don't. I don't think it's a choice of what you identify as. I think it's specifically you can identify your gender. It's a specific thing. It's not anything you can identify as. It's gender is a social construct, and only you know what your gender is. And I think when we say terms like you can identify as whatever you want, then you're opening yourself up to crazy stuff, because that's not really what you mean. You mean specifically for gender. You don't mean for other things. You don't mean I can identify as your beneficiary in your insurance, so now you have to give me the insurance because I identified that way. Like, you only mean it for gender. You don't mean it for anything else. So that we should be specific for that. That's what we mean.
Okay, you've convinced me. I agree with you on that's why I was trying to caveat with the like, if as long as it doesn't affect anybody else, because I was like, well, I'm not going to identify as the king of England and then get all the benefits of it. But yeah,
but I'm saying you want to, if someone identifies as a different gender, you do want them to get all the benefits of that gender.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's the same argument as it's a life. It's just not a human life. Like, you're using like, you don't argue with their point, except it's imprecise terminology that makes them wrong in an argument, because their terminology is wrong. They meant the right thing. They're just using the wrong terminology. And I think the same thing with saying you can identify as whatever you want. No, you can identify what your gender is, because only you know what's going on in your head and your body. That's different than identify as whatever you want.
Sure.
And I'm not saying male. And I'm not saying male or female as the limit of genders. There's a spectrum of genders, sure, but only you get to identify your gender, not anything you want to identify. Because otherwise, I would like to identify as a billionaire. Give me my money.
So back to the Apache helicopter argument, because you convinced me on that. But what I will say is that this would be my new comeback if ever someone said that to me. I identify as Apache helicopter. I would say you can't do that. You can't identify as a comedian even though you are verifiably unfunny, and you only have the one joke. Yeah, no. Steven Crowder. Like, there's lots of people who identify as Dave
Smalley.
No.
Yes, but okay. There's another one too.
Dave. Why am I spacing on the guy's name? He's a YouTube like pundit that like I left the left, and Dave Rubin. He identifies as a comedian. He thinks he's a comedian. He has never been funny. Like, I've watched actual stand-up of his, and he's literally never been funny.
As I say, I don't believe that conservatives can do conservative content funny. Conservatives can be funny about any other topic. Like, you could be a hardcore conservative and be funny making you may be a redneck jokes and be awesomely funny with it, but you can't be funny about political topics because their positions are not funny. But
I watched
non-empathetic evil.
I watched his stand-up from when he was liberal.
He may also just not be funny about anything. Like,
he's just not funny.
I'm not defending him. I'm just saying in general.
Yeah. Like Thomas Smith is a good example, because I agree with Thomas Smith on all non-pop culture things. His pop culture things I find weird as shit sometimes. Like, he's really into one thing, and then he's like nobody likes that this other thing, and you're like,
I don't care about lyrics. Lyrics aren't important. Lyrics aren't the music. Only the music's the music.
But and actually, I will say Thomas Smith has gotten funnier in a lot of ways, especially when he's around. He's good at certain types of. I think
he is funny when it's not his show. When he's not like you talk about not being great at improv when you're focused on all the other stuff you have to do. I think he's the least funny on his own shows. Like when he's with other people and he can just relax and talk. I don't think he's a comedian though. He's just a regular guy who's kind of funny. He does not understand he's not like Eli.
He's also
who knows the in and outs of a joke and knows how to make a joke and knows how to sell the joke. He just says something that's funny sometimes, but then he fucking follows it up with, hey, I'm just kidding. He undoes every one of his funny jokes because he will never just let it lie as a joke.
It's also tough because I just don't like handsome and pretty people being funny. I
can't help it, man. I can't help being both.
It bothers me because it's like, no, like I get that there is no God, but like for this example, there is. God gave you the one thing. You don't get everything. The reason why I'm funny is because I'm ugly and I had to
for lots of comedians
funny.
Say that it's not fair that you're good looking and funny. Yeah, I mean, and I only say that because on the old opening arguments they used to say a real life lawyer and a comedian. I'm like, you're not a comedian just because you're funnier than a lawyer. Like when he used to say inquisitive interviewer, I'm like, yeah, you are an inquisitive interviewer. That's fair. Yeah. Just because you have your own podcast and you think you're funny on it. It reminds me of someone who used to do improv with me, and he would want to sing duets with our musical director. And one of the other guys in my group said, so are we singing because people pay to hear us sing, or because we like to sing and there's an audience? And I was like, that's a good point. I was like, Brian, you can't sing anymore. Like, not that he's horrible, but nobody would have paid to see him under any other circumstance if they came to the comedy show and he decided to get up and sing with our musician who can sing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm just saying, self-identification, I think it is, you can identify your gender, not identify as whatever you want. It's the same to me as human life versus life. It's be specific what we really mean, because otherwise it's easy to whataboutism it and turn it around and say, what about this, this, and this? And it's hard to defend the other use cases.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's also something that I wouldn't jump into an argument and fight against the person whose side I'm on in public. I'll have that conversation here, and I'll have that conversation one-on-one separately. I wouldn't jump into an argument and say, well, really? Well, actually, you shouldn't say this while someone's in the middle of an argument with someone else.
Yeah, you review tape afterwards with the person, like a coach, and you say, like, look.
No notes during the show.
A, B, C, D, E, you were right. You got to F, and we were like, nope, that's not the way we want to do. Like, that's not the.
And even if you disagree with me, I'm saying it's not effective. It's not. You're opening yourself up. Like you may want to say it that way, but you're just giving the other people a chance to attack you when you do. Yeah.
I'm hungry, and I know we have not been recording for very, very long, but I was thinking we could start wrapping up. Unless you get any more topics. Stuff to put the topic.
No, I think we're going. We've been going like 50-something minutes. We're good.
Yeah, we went for like 6 or 7 minutes without it actually being about the topic.
I know, that's why we
started the episode.
That's why I said 50-something, not 54. We're about 50. We're close. We're 48. By the time we do our spiels, you guys want to hear some spiels? I'll spiel for you. I'll spiel for your spilkas. Listen, if you guys are watching on YouTube, then that's great. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe, though. You want to do that. And when you subscribe, go ahead and ring the bell so you'll get notified. And then when you're watching a video like this and you say, this specific video, this is the content I want to hear, like this, like the ones that are topics that you like, so we'll know those are topics that we should do adjacent topics to. That's the only way we know, man. Or make comments as well and tell specifically which parts of the topics you like and what other topics similar you like. This way we'll know. We can be responsive to you in the YouTube world. Audio world, I don't know. You stick it in your eye hole, I'm all about you. You stick it in your ear hole, I have nothing to say. There's nothing to do about that to show that you like us. Nothing I could think of. I don't know. Can you think of anything, Michael?
Sure. If you are listening to us on a podcast app, you could give us 5 stars or a thumbs up or whatever your app allows you to express like and joy from. You could also comment and you could review. And if you wanted to do something monetarily to help us out, you could go to patreon.com/talking about the big stuff, where we have 3 pay options. All are monthly. So you get, for $1 a month, you get 4 episodes 4 days early each, not all, not all at once. For $3 a month, you get those same deal plus some bonus content on those episodes. And then for $10 a month, you get all the same things as mentioned before, plus the video version of the extra content, and usually there's a little bit of extra, like just cherry on top content for you. Matthew will do something terrible.
Like I'll say, what if you were to stick a cherry way up into your anus, and I'll use my tongue to push it farther up into your colon, and then I have to do suction to pull it back out? That would be a $10 thing.
No, I'm leaving that. Alex just said that he's clipping that so that we can throw that on Instagram. Well, actually,
that belongs on Instagram.
Yeah. So those are the options. We really appreciate you. I know that last week was the thankful episode, but
I don't like you this week. Last week I was thankful. This week I don't care no more.
Well, what about the people who didn't listen last week? What about them?
They need to go back and listen. If you want to be appreciated, you have to support us by going back and listen. Listen to the Thanksgiving episode. It's uplifting, Charlie.
Play it on YouTube, then play it on Spotify, then play it on whatever your other app of choice is. That's what I do every Friday. All right. You got anything else?
I just want to tell everybody thanks for sticking around and talking about the big stuff. It's making it to the end of the podcast. It's like making it to the end of this year. Painful but satisfying.
Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. If you have thoughts or questions or topics you'd like us to tackle in a future episode, drop us a line on our social media channels. Engage with this video when you are now watching it as a VOD on YouTube. Send us an email. We love hearing from our listeners, bringing us topics, because if you leave it up to the three of us, we're going to eventually be talking about underwater basket weaving. So we would appreciate you guys reaching out a little bit. Don't forget to subscribe to Talking About the Big Stuff on your favorite platform. Give us a 5-star rating. Engage with it. Criticize us. We need to grow and be better, and you're going to help us be there. You're going to help us get to that point. It really helps us more to reach out and also to keep the conversation going. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week with more big ideas and more thought-provoking discussions. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep talking about the big stuff.
The preceding podcast has been a Chocolate Diamond Media LLC production. Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.